What does it take to change the world? For one man in ancient Athens, it all started with a death sentence. He watched as his mentor, a man who taught him to question everything, was executed by the state. That single traumatic event sparked a lifelong mission. It drove him to create what was essentially the first university in the Western world, and to develop revolutionary ideas about reality, government, and justice that would echo for millennia. This is the story of Plato, and how the death of Socrates fueled a philosophical revolution that's still shaping our world. This isn't just a history lesson. It's a story about how one mind, shattered by injustice, put itself back together to build a new framework for understanding everything. It's a story about the power of ideas to cross time, to challenge how we see the world, and to ask the biggest question of all: what is real? To understand Plato, you have to understand the world that made him. He was born around 428 or 427 BCE into a city that was both the jewel of the ancient world and a pressure cooker of turmoil. Athens was a city of dazzling contradictions. This was the city of Pericles, the Parthenon, and the birth of democracy, a place that celebrated human potential, art, and intellectual freedom like no other. But Plato was born into the twilight of this golden age. The devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta had already started. It was a conflict that would drag on for nearly 3 decades, draining Athens of its money, its confidence, and its power. Plato grew up in the shadow of war, seeing political chaos chip away at the democratic ideals his city was famous for. His own family was a perfect example of this conflict. He was an aristocrat, born to privilege. His father's family claimed to be descended from the god Poseidon, while his mother's side was related to the famous lawgiver Solon. Politics was in his blood. Yet this noble heritage would become a source of deep conflict. Some of his own relatives, including his uncle Critias, later became part of the 30 Tyrants, a brutal regime that seized power in Athens after its defeat. From a young age, Plato was set up for a life in public service. He got the best education money could buy, studying poetry, gymnastics, and music. It's said his birth name was Aristocles, meaning best glory, but he was nicknamed Platon, meaning broad, supposedly by his wrestling coach because of his wide shoulders. He was expected to be a playwright or a politician to take his place among the ruling class. But then he met a man who shattered those expectations and sent his life down a totally different path. A man who didn't teach from a fancy lectern, but from the dusty, chaotic heart of the Athenian marketplace. That man was Socrates. Socrates was unlike anyone Plato had ever met. He wasn't a teacher in any traditional sense. He wrote nothing down, claimed to know nothing, and his classroom was the city itself. His method was conversation, a relentless, probing style of questioning we now call the Socratic method. He'd walk up to so-called experts generals, politicians, poets, and ask them simple questions. What is courage? What is justice? What is virtue? Then, through logic, he would expose the contradictions in their answers, proving they didn't really know what they claimed to. He was the city's gadfly, a buzzing, annoying insect sent by the gods, as he put it, to sting the lazy horse of the state into action, to wake it from its comfortable, unthinking sleep. For the young, brilliant Plato, this was electrifying. He had been taught what to think. Socrates taught him how to think. He gave up his dreams of being a playwright, legend says. He burned his tragedies after meeting Socrates and devoted himself to this strange, barefoot philosopher who valued questions more than answers. He joined a circle of young men who followed Socrates everywhere, listening, learning, and taking part in these public dissections of Athenian life. For about a decade, Plato soaked up the Socratic spirit, the commitment to reason, the belief that the unexamined life is not worth living, and the radical idea that wisdom starts with admitting you know nothing. This mentorship, though, was happening as Athens was decaying. The long war with Sparta had ended in a humiliating defeat. The democracy was overthrown and replaced by the vicious rule of the 30 tyrants. Plato's own relatives were at the heart of this regime, and they invited him to join. But Plato was disgusted by their violence and their attempt to involve Socrates in their crimes. When democracy was restored a short time later, the suspicion remained. The people of Athens, reeling from war, plague, and chaos, were looking for someone to blame. And the city's gadfly, the man who spent his life questioning every belief and exposing the ignorance of the powerful, was an easy target. In 399 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Socrates, then 70 years old, was arrested and put on trial. The official charges were impiety, not recognizing the state gods, and corrupting the youth. Plato was there, witnessing the event that would define the rest of his life. The trial was a sham, a political hit job disguised as a defense of tradition. In his defense, which Plato masterfully recorded in the Apology, Socrates didn't beg or plead. He doubled down. He defended his life's work, arguing his philosophical mission was a service to the state, a divine calling to force his fellow citizens to look inward. He wasn't a corrupter. He was a healer of souls. His defense was a masterclass in integrity, but a disaster as a legal strategy. He spoke with a moral and intellectual superiority that infuriated the jury of 501 citizens. After being found guilty, he was asked to propose his own punishment. In a flash of supreme irony, he suggested that for his service to the city, he should get free meals at public expense for life. The jury was not amused and voted for the prosecutor's recommendation: death. Plato and Socrates' other followers watched, helpless. They offered to pay a huge fine, but it was too late. A month later, Socrates was ordered to drink a cup of hemlock, a deadly poison. Plato's dialogue, the Phaedo, gives a heart-wrenching account of Socrates' final hours. He was calm, surrounded by his weeping friends, still talking philosophy, comforting them with arguments for the soul's immortality. He faced death not with fear, but with a philosopher's courage. When the moment came, he drank the poison without hesitating and passed away. For Plato, this was more than the death of a mentor. It was reason itself being murdered by an ignorant, emotional mob. The wisest, most just man he knew had been legally killed by the very democracy he was born to serve. The city he was supposed to lead had revealed itself to be sick, a society so lost in shadows that it killed the one person who tried to show it the light. This event completely disillusioned Plato with politics. How could a state be just if it could commit such a monstrous act? These weren't abstract questions. They were the anguished cries of a disciple who had lost his master. The execution of Socrates lit a fire in Plato's soul. He realized he couldn't fix the world from inside a broken political system. First, you had to fix the thinking that created the system. You had to answer the deep questions. What is justice? What is truth? How can we ever know? His life's work, his entire philosophy, would be an attempt to answer the questions that rose from the ashes of Socrates' funeral pyre. Deeply saddened and maybe fearing for his own safety, he left Athens. For the next 12 years, his quest for answers would take him across the known world. Plato's journey wasn't a vacation. It was an intellectual pilgrimage. He traveled to Egypt, a land of ancient, monumental stability, a sharp contrast to the chaos of Athens. He then spent significant time in southern Italy, a hub of Greek culture and philosophy. Here, he met the followers of Pythagoras, a mystical mathematician who had lived a century earlier. The Pythagorean influence on Plato was enormous. They believed the universe ran on mathematical principles. To them, numbers weren't just for counting. They were the building blocks of reality. They saw harmony in the cosmos and believed in the immortality of the soul. For Plato, this was a revelation. Socrates had focused on ethics, on human questions. The Pythagoreans offered a way to understand the entire universe through pure, unchanging, abstract principles like numbers. A mathematical truth, like 2 = 4, is always true, no matter what anyone thinks. Maybe Plato thought there were also eternal truths about justice, beauty, and goodness. This planted the seed for his most famous idea, that beyond our messy, sensory world, there lies a more real, permanent world that we can only access through reason. His travels also took him on 3 separate and dangerous trips to Syracuse in Sicily. Here, he tried a risky experiment to put his political philosophy into practice. Syracuse was ruled by a powerful tyrant. Dionysius I. Plato was invited by the tyrant's brother-in-law, Dion, a huge admirer of his ideas. The hope was that Plato could educate the tyrant and mold him into a true philosopher king, a ruler guided by a deep understanding of justice, not by greed. The experiment was a total disaster. The first trip allegedly ended with the paranoid Dionysius I getting so angry with Plato that he had the philosopher sold into slavery. Fortunately, friends ransomed him. While this story comes from ancient sources, it shows just how badly things went. Despite this, he was persuaded to return twice more to tutor the younger Dionysius II. Again, court politics and the young tyrant's lack of interest doomed the project. These failures taught Plato a hard lesson. It's not enough to know the truth. You have to build an institution that can cultivate minds from the ground up. Section 5. The founding of the Academy. Around 387 BCE, after his first disastrous trip to Sicily, a wiser Plato returned to Athens. His travels had taught him that the path to a better world didn't run through existing politics. It ran through education. If he couldn't reform a tyrant, he would raise a new generation of leaders who actually understood justice. He bought a piece of land just outside Athens, a public park sacred to the hero Academus. And there, in that quiet grove, he founded his school. He called it simply the Academy. This wasn't a school in our sense of the word. There was no tuition, no formal enrollment. But it was, in effect, the Western world's first great institution of higher learning, a blueprint for the university. It was a community of scholars dedicated to research and the pursuit of knowledge. While other schools existed, Plato's Academy was a center for cooperative, rigorous inquiry, unlike any other. There's a legend that a sign above the entrance read, "Let none but geometers enter here." While the sign itself is probably a myth, the sentiment was real. Influenced by the Pythagoreans, Plato saw mathematics as the training ground for the mind. It taught you to deal with abstract, eternal truths, to move beyond the deceptive world of the senses and into the pure realm of reason. The teaching method was based on Socrates' own dialectic. It was a process of questioning, debating, and arguing, designed to lead people from shaky opinions toward real knowledge. Plato wasn't interested in teaching people how to win arguments for personal gain. He was interested in teaching them how to find the truth. The Academy quickly became the intellectual center of the Greek world, attracting the brightest minds from everywhere. This included the great mathematician Eudoxus, and most famously, a brilliant young student from northern Greece named Aristotle, who would study and teach there for 20 years. The Academy was Plato's answer to the death of Socrates. It was a sanctuary where reason could flourish, safe from the passions of the mob. And it's from this institution that his most revolutionary ideas would emerge. At the heart of everything Plato taught is one massive, world-changing idea, the theory of forms. This theory is his answer to the question that haunted him. In a world where everything is always changing, is there anything that is eternally and absolutely true? His answer is yes. But that truth, he argues, isn't in the physical world we see, hear, and touch. That world is a world of illusion, a realm of imperfect, decaying copies. True reality, the real world, exists in a higher, non-physical realm, the world of the forms. So what exactly is a form? Don't think of a shape. Think of it as the perfect blueprint, the eternal essence, or the absolute idea of a thing. Let's take a chair. In our world, we see thousands of things we call chairs. They're all different wood, metal, comfortable, ugly. They're all imperfect, and eventually they will all break. According to Plato, none of these are the real chair. They're all just flawed imitations. Somewhere in that higher reality exists the one perfect, eternal, and unchanging form of chairness. This form is the pure idea of what a chair is. It's the blueprint that every physical chair in our world tries and fails to be. We only recognize a physical object as a chair because our soul, Plato believed, has some deep, forgotten memory of the perfect form of the chair. This applies to everything. There are forms for objects like horses and trees, but more importantly, there are forms for concepts. There is a perfect form of justice, a perfect form of beauty, and the highest of all, the form of the good. When we say a law is just, we're saying it participates in, or reflects, the perfect form of justice. Our physical world is like a world of shadows, and the forms are the real objects casting those shadows. This is a radical reordering of reality. It means true knowledge can't be found by studying the physical world, because that world is unstable and deceptive. True knowledge can only be grasped by the intellect, by pure reason. The philosopher's job is to turn away from the distracting world of the senses and, through rigorous training, climb to that higher realm to see the forms themselves. To explain this mind-bending concept, Plato used one of the most powerful analogies in history, the allegory of the cave. In his most famous book, The Republic, Plato asks us to imagine a group of people who have lived their entire lives in a deep cave. They've been there since childhood, chained so they can't move their heads. All they can see is the wall in front of them. Behind them, a large fire is burning. And between the fire and the prisoners, people walk back and forth, carrying objects, statues of animals, tools, and so on. The fire casts the shadows of these objects onto the wall. For the prisoners, these flickering shadows are their entire reality. They play games naming the shadows, and they honor whoever is best at predicting which shadow will come next. They believe the shadows are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, what if one of them were suddenly freed? He's forced to stand and turn around. The firelight would be blinding. He'd be confused. The real objects would seem less real to him than the shadows he's known his whole life. If someone told him that what he was now seeing was real, and the shadows were just illusions, he wouldn't believe them. But suppose he is dragged, against his will, up the steep slope and out of the cave into the world above. The sunlight would be excruciating. Slowly his eyes would adjust. First he'd see only shadows, then reflections in water. Then he'd be able to look at the objects themselves, the trees, the mountains. Eventually he would be able to look at the sky, the stars, and finally the sun itself. And in that moment he would understand. He would realize the sun is the source of all light and life, the cause of everything he sees. He has come face to face with true reality. He is enlightened. He would feel pity for the other prisoners, still trapped in the darkness, congratulating each other on their knowledge of shadows. He'd have no desire to go back to their games, but Plato says he must. The philosopher who has seen the truth has a duty to go back down into the cave to try and free the others. But what happens when he returns? His eyes, used to the light, would be blind in the darkness. He'd stumble around, unable to play their shadow games. The other prisoners would laugh at him. They'd say his journey outside ruined his sight. And if he tried to tell them that their reality was a lie, they'd think he was crazy. And if he tried to break their chains and drag them into the light, Plato concludes they would kill him. This powerful allegory is a story on many levels. The cave is our sensory world. The prisoners are all of us, trapped by our unexamined opinions. The shadows of the imperfect things we mistake for truth. The freed prisoner is the philosopher. The journey out is the difficult process of education. The world outside is the realm of the forms, and the sun is the ultimate form of the good, which illuminates all other truths. And the tragic return? The philosopher being mocked and killed? That is the story of Socrates. The allegory is not just a metaphor for Plato's philosophy. It's a memorial to his murdered master. Plato's experience with politics from Athenian democracy to his failed attempts in Syracuse convinced him that societies were broken. They were run by ignorance and greed. The allegory of the cave showed the problem. The state was being run by the prisoners, for the prisoners. His solution, laid out in the Republic, was to design a city based not on opinion, but on truth, a city ruled by those who had made it out of the cave. His ideal state, Callipolis, or the beautiful city, is founded on one radical idea: specialization. Justice in the state, he argues, is simply each part doing the job it's naturally suited for. He divides society into three classes, which correspond to the three parts of the human soul. First, the producers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. This is the largest class and corresponds to the appetitive part of the soul, our desires. Their job is to provide for the city's material needs. Second, the auxiliaries, the warriors and police. They correspond to the spirited part of the soul emotions, like pride and anger. Their job is to defend the state. Their defining virtue is courage. Third, at the very top, the guardians, the rulers. This is the smallest class. They correspond to the rational part of the soul, the part that loves truth. Their job is to govern with wisdom. A state is just, Plato argues, when these three classes work in perfect harmony. When a farmer tries to be a soldier, or a soldier a ruler, that's injustice, and it leads to chaos. Now, this is where Plato's ideas get truly radical, and for many, deeply disturbing. To ensure this harmony, the top two classes live a completely communal life. No private property, no wealth, no family. Most shockingly, he gets rid of the traditional family for them. Marriages are temporary and arranged by the state. Children are taken at birth and raised in communal nurseries, never knowing their parents. This, Plato argued, was essential to eliminate greed and private loyalties. The guardians must see the entire city as their family. And who gets to be a guardian? Not the rich or the popular. Only the philosophers. The rulers must be philosopher kings, those rare people who have made the full journey out of the cave. They don't want to rule. They'd rather contemplate the forms, but they do so out of a sense of duty. To create them, Plato designs an exhaustive 50-year-long education system, starting with music and gymnastics and culminating in years of philosophy. To maintain this perfect order, he advocates for strict censorship of art and a noble lie, a myth the state will tell its citizens to ensure they accept their class. Plato's Republic is a visionary work, but it's also profoundly anti-democratic and authoritarian. It's a stark reminder that one person's utopia can be another's dystopia. But for Plato, true freedom wasn't doing whatever you want. True freedom was living a life governed by reason, in a state structured by justice. Section 9. The nature of love and knowledge. Plato's thought extended into every corner of human life, including the nature of love and learning. In his dialogue, The Symposium, he redefines love, or eros. Through the voice of a wise priestess named Diotima, he presents love as a journey, a ladder of love. It starts at the bottom rung, physical attraction to one beautiful body. But a true lover then ascends to appreciating all physical beauty. From there, he learns that the beauty of a soul is far more valuable, falling in love with noble minds. This leads him higher, to a love of knowledge and philosophy. Finally, at the top of the ladder, the lover is granted a sudden vision of the form of beauty itself, absolute and perfect. He has transformed physical desire into a purely philosophical quest. This is the origin of what we call Platonic love not a lack of passion, but a love that uses physical attraction as a launching point to reach the highest spiritual and intellectual reality. He also had a revolutionary idea about how we learn. If the forms are in another realm, how do we know them? He argues that the soul is immortal and once existed in the realm of the forms. Being born is a trauma. That makes the soul forget what it knew. Therefore, learning isn't putting new information in. It's a process of recollection, of unforgetting. The teacher's job is just to ask the right questions to help a student remember what their soul already knows. Plato died around 347 BCE at the old age of about 80. His greatest practical legacy was the academy. Though the original institution was destroyed in 86 BCE, Platonic schools and philosophical thought continued in Athens for centuries, until the final closure of a Neoplatonic school in 529 A by the Emperor Justinian. The Academy's nearly 900-year legacy as a center of thought created the blueprint for higher education. Our very word academic comes from the grove where he taught. His influence on Western thought is almost impossible to overstate. The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead famously said that all of European philosophy is just a series of footnotes to Plato. His most brilliant student, Aristotle, would challenge many of his ideas, especially the theory of forms. That core disagreement, Plato's focus on abstract reason versus Aristotle's on empirical observation, set the stage for a central debate in philosophy for the next 2,000 years. Later, early Christian theologians like St. Augustine merged Platonic philosophy with their own doctrine. Plato's higher realm of forms fit neatly with the idea of heaven, and his form of the good was easily identified with God. His political ideas have been both an inspiration and a warning admired by those who dream of a perfectly rational society and feared by those who champion individual freedom. Ultimately, Plato's legacy is in the questions he forced us to ask. He taught us to be skeptical of our senses, to question popular opinion, and to believe in objective truth. He gave us a language to talk about justice, beauty, and goodness as real things. Every time we argue about what's fair, every time we feel there's a deeper reality behind the surface of life, every time we believe education can make a better world, we are walking in Plato's shadow. He is a monumental pillar of Western civilization, a mind so powerful that its echo can still be heard, loud and clear, 24 centuries later. Plato's entire journey was a search for truth, sparked by a tragic injustice. His questions are just as relevant today. What do you think? Is there a higher reality of perfect forms? And is Plato's ideal state a utopia or a nightmare? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into one of history's smartest minds, make sure to like and subscribe for more dives into the thinkers who shaped our world. From the trauma of Socrates' death to a school that would outlast empires, Plato's life was a testament to one powerful idea, that the world we see isn't the only world there is. He believed that through reason, we could climb past the shadows of our experience and glimpse a higher eternal truth. He dared to imagine a perfect city, to define love, and to map the soul's journey from ignorance to enlightenment. His answers might be controversial, and his ideal society might seem rigid, but his quest was a noble one. He tried to build a world safe from the kind of injustice that killed his mentor. His work is a timeless challenge to live an examined life, to strive for knowledge, and to begin the hard, rewarding climb out of the cave and into the light.